Good morning, guys. So, after learning about the teacher characteristics, the learner characteristics, as well as the teaching styles and learner styles, so it's time now to talk about teaching approaches, or what we call also the methods, techniques, and strategies. So there are so many different methodologies and strategies that go into becoming an effective instructor. A consistent theme throughout all of this is for a teacher to take the time to know their students because they care, not because they have to. So when an instructor knows the stories behind the students, they are able to design lessons that are more fun, more meaningful, and more effective because they were designed with the students' best interests in mind. So there are also plenty of pre-made lessons, activities, and tests that are available not only online but also from textbooks. And these are those that teachers could use. But you need to decide if you want to be the original teacher who makes a significant impact on your students, or a pre-made teacher a student needs to get through. Okay? So for today, let's learn how to become someone who's original through our own teaching methods and teaching strategies. But before we would be doing that, of course, let's get through these approaches first. Okay? So we have here the objectives. So our objectives for today would be for you to describe the different traditional techniques such as lectures, discussions, questioning, as well as the use of audiovisuals, and to also describe strategies for facilitating the use of small group or collaborative learning, including the use of structured small group activities and peer teaching, as well as simulation and problem-based learning activities. And lastly, we need to understand the importance of computer-assisted instructions and distance learning in our current situation. So this will be the general outline on what we would be talking about. So these are divided into four, and we have the traditional teaching strategies, the activity-based teaching strategies, the computer teaching strategies, and distance learning. So for the traditional teaching strategies, these are lecturing, discussion, questioning, the use of audiovisuals, as well as the combination of all of these traditional teaching strategies, which is known as the interactive lecture. So for the activity-based teaching strategies, on the other hand, we have the cooperative learning, simulations, problem-based learning, and the self-learning modules. So let's start with the traditional teaching strategies. So there is this cartoon described by Zachary in 1985, in which a teacher is telling her students, "Okay, class, my job is to talk and your job is to listen. So if you finish first, let me know." So the cartoon captures the concern that many educators express about lecturing. Okay? The concern is that because students are passive listeners, they tune out before the end of class and miss important information. So we are now talking about lecturing here. And as you can see, lecturing is under attack. Okay? And that is not a new one, or not a news, no? For many years, active learning has been in vogue while passive learning is out. And critics say there is no more passive mode of learning than lecturing. So, well, in the days of Socrates and Plato, lectures were a means of conveying facts, information, and ideas that could not readily be obtained elsewhere. But books, charts, and tapes were not available during that time, so the lecture became an essential means of teaching. So today, we have already a broad array of teaching materials and strategies from which to choose. So many would argue that we no longer need the lecture method. But the criticisms of lecturing have stimulated some educators to write in defense of lecturing. So these educators, and in their thesis, it says that lecturing is generally good, not bad, but there are actually bad lectures, and lectures can be used to exist. And what is this lecture or lecturing all about? This is actually a speech read or delivered before an audience or class. So this is especially for instruction or to set forth some subject. So, ganun naman po pala, ma'am, no? So, bakit pa po kami tinuturuan ng mga teachers namin through lecturing? So, of course, we have what we call the purposes of lecturing. We have here, first is that it is an efficient means of introducing learners to new topics. So, hindi ka naman po pwedeng basta-basta di discussion. No? You have to let your students, okay, learn first, okay, something that is relatively new for them. And usually this can use or your teachers can use to set the stage for a new area of learning and place the topic into the perspective of what is already known. So, for example, no, an instructor might use a formal lecture to introduce the topic of, say, fluid and electrolyte balance, okay, and relate it to what the learners already know about homeostasis and nourishment. So, in this case, he or she could then use other strategies to develop the topic further. So, napaka-importante talaga na mauna muna yung lecturing. Kaya hindi natin dapat kailangan tanggalin siya. Okay? Ano pa? The lecturing method also is used to stimulate students' interest in a subject. So, minsan, hindi mo naman basta-basta ibibigay, no? Yung bang, ang dating is, mag-discussion tayo, class. No. Okay? So, kailangan mo munang kunin. Yan, no? Yung, motivation. Okay? Yung interest ng mga estudyante mo. Okay? So, let's say, for example, you wanted to talk about pharmacology. Okay? So, minsan kapag narinig ng bata yung word na pharmacology, di ba? Minsan, parang, ay, ano yun? Parang, very dull subject ito, no? Pero kung ikaw ngayon, and that is because of an uninitiated learner. Pero kapag ikaw ngayon, inintroduce mo yung isang topic about pharmacology, okay? And ginamit mo siya, for example, sa mga buhay, doon sa work natin as physical therapist, then the learner now would be able to see it as a fascinating subject, okay? And that just might be interesting to study. So, kailangan talaga mag-lecturing ka muna prior to other mode of or technique of teaching. Why? Because this can be used to inspire people. Okay? Ayan. Another purpose of lecture is to integrate and synthesize a large body of knowledge from several fields or sources. So, as a knowledgeable teacher, Okay, can synthesize the information more readily than can a learner, no, who is a novice in the field. Kumbaga, kaya na daw niyang sama-samahin, okay, yung mga topics na yon ng isang upuan lang or isang lecturean lang. Okay? So, kunwari, gusto mong ituro sa mga estudyante mo is anatomy. Okay? Kung ikaw ngayon expert ka na, you can weave, okay, yung mga iba't ibang topics, okay, and to come up with just one. Yon. So, yan po yun, yung synthesis, okay, ng large body of knowledge. So, what else? Difficult concepts can also be clarified during lectures. May mga topics kasi na mahirap, like for example, yung concepts of arrhythmia, no? Compensation in acid-base balance, okay, yung intracranial pressure. Sometimes, kapag inaral ng, excuse me, inaral ng ating estudyante yan, medyo mahihirapan sila, di ba? So, this can only be, not only, but rather, this may be best explained, no? Through lecturing method, especially if we are using or adding some graphics onto it. Okay? Next. Says here that lecture is valuable where knowledge is advancing rapidly and up-to-date textbooks are not available. Okay? So, this is true actually a few years ago, no? This was in the case of AIDS, okay? And may be true in any specialty at any time. So, a lecturer who is a clinician working an area where practice is changing all the time may best be able to convey both the content and the excitement of rapid clinical change through lecture methods. Yan. So, what are now the advantages of the lecture method? Ayan, number 1 daw po, no? Sabi dyan, it is economical. Bakit economical, ma'am? Imaginein mo, no? Makakapagturo ka kahit napakarami ng estudyante mo. Say, for example, 200 students, okay, can be taught through formal lectures. Ibig sabihin yung plenary sessions, di ba? Okay, hindi ba naman economical yon? Bakit economical? Kasi, imaginein mo, pwede ka nang gumamit ng iisang classroom lang, no? So, pwede mo ngayon gamitin ng malaking classroom and then, hindi mo na kailangan ng napakadaming classrooms kung ang isang klase mo is 200 and divide it into 20 students, no? So, this is very effective as long as the lecturer has a microphone. Okay? And not only that, this it is also economical in terms of student time. Okay? So, kasi a great deal of information can be communicated in a 1-hour lecture. Okay? Usually more information than that could be gained, no, from a discussion. Okay, for instance. So, kumbaga kasi yung teacher mo alam na niya kung ano yung mga importante na dapat niyang ituro. So, makakatipid ka nga naman, no, ng mga oras, okay, ng mga estudyante kaysa basahin nilang lahat yan sa libro, okay, yung mga ganon. Next is, it can also supplement a textbook by enhancing a topic and making it come to life. It's obvious. If you would just be like reading, no, okay, and browsing on your textbook, somehow, iba pa rin kapag yung teacher mo yung nag-e-explain eh. Diba? Okay? And, your teacher could have what we call now the wealth of personal experience and enthusiasm for the subject. Okay? Next, another thing in here, the teacher could also serve as a role model for students. Okay? since the teacher here is the authority on the subject and is a model of someone who has developed expertise in a field and who cares about knowledge and learning. So learners now have the advantage of watching a creative mind at work. Okay? Why? Because the lecturer can demonstrate critical thinking and problem solving being done by an expert. Okay? Kasi yung mga teachers ninyo, para ba daw silang gamay na daw nila, no? Yung mga tinuturo nila. So they are being now a role model for students. And also lecturers enjoy a sense of theater, okay? As they are on the stage in the classroom. So para daw po silang mga theater actors, okay? Why? Because, you know, when we talk of good lecturers, they are often gifted, no, with some of the qualities that make a successful actor, di ba? Okay? Why? Because they could have a good speaking voice, good timing, dramatic gestures, no? They could also have a sense of humor and a good memory. So, they also like being in the limelight, yon, and playing to the audience. In this case, it would bring the lecturer some enjoyment, okay? And because they are so good at it, they can also bring enjoyment to the learners as well. Ayan. The lecture method also helps students develop their listening abilities. Okay, why? This is an advantage of a one-way verbal communication. Okay? It asserts that students must discipline themselves to listen, remember, track arguments, okay, decide what to take notes, and relate on what is being said to be assigned or to the assigned reading. So in light of all these actions, maybe lectures don't consist of such passive learning at all. Okay? So the lecture method has enough advantages to warrant its continued use. Okay? Teachers should be sure, however, that they are lecturing because it serves a good purpose and not just because they don't want to take the time to develop another teaching strategy. Okay, so teachers should also do everything they can to make sure they are good lecturers. Now, we don't only have advantages, though, of the lecture method. There are also disadvantages. So, as already mentioned, many people object to the lecture method because it places learners in the passive role of a sponge. So, just there to soak up knowledge. That may be true if the lecture is not planned and carried out well. So, even if a student is mentally active, nothing can ensure that such activity will continue for the whole lecture. So, in fact, there is a significant amount of research that points out that the students rarely attend to the whole lecture. Okay? So, educators who decry the lecture method claim that few teachers are good lecturers and therefore few can achieve class objectives, okay, through this method. So, much less hold students' attention or serve as good role models. Okay? Those students who were subjected to poor lectures throughout their college days could become educators themselves and can often fall into the same bad habits. So one of the chief disadvantages of the lecture method is that by nature, it also lends itself to the teaching of facts, okay? While placing little emphasis on problem solving, decision making, analytical thinking, or transfer of learning. And somehow, okay, it is not conducive to meeting students' individual learning needs. So students are usually limited to learning from an authority figure and learning by the stimulation of only one of the senses, and that is hearing. Okay? So in a formal lecture, students have no opportunity to learn from peers, and they to also learn from manipulation of data. It's also limited to discover, to learn visually or through touch, and so on. So the lecture works best for auditory, linguistic learners and may disadvantage those with other learning styles. And finally, students, okay, would have the problem of limited attention span on the part, no, of the learners. Okay, so as you can see in the graph here, we have the graph. Sorry, okay, that's the attention span study. This is now showing, okay, that the concentration of a particular student would be rising to a peak of about 15 minutes, okay? So as you can see here, you're going to look at this, okay? So that will be at 15 minutes. And then eventually, it will fall steadily until the end of the lecture. And somehow it would again go up, okay? And usually that will happen if the lecture is going to an end, di ba? So parang alam mo 'yon, parang ang dating is kapag ang teacher mo nagle-lecture ng matagal, tapos yung umpisa enthusiastic ka, 'di ba? Nakikinig-kinig ka ng ganyan. Tapos hanggang nasa gitna na, mga 15 minutes na, ayan, parang hinihele ka na. Okay? Tapos eventually, kapag patapos na yung lecture, 'di ba? Parang nagmamadali ka na. Bakit? Kasi yes, tapos na yung lecture. So that's the time nagiging attentive na naman kayo. Okay? And so that is why as lecturer, sabi nga nila, this attention span study, okay, tells us that we need to do a lot of different ways, no? Sometimes we need to create a new stimulus, okay, to arouse the students. Kumbaga para makinig ulit, okay? And this stimulation could be through the lectures or the lecturer's voice, no? It could also be through giving breaks, could also be through giving or yung having the sense of humor, okay? And the like. So comparing now the advantages to the disadvantages of lecturing, it seems that the method is valuable and should still be retained. But it should be used skillfully and supplemented with other teaching methods. So by using a variety of strategies, the teacher can enhance the advantages of all of the techniques. So we also have how to organize the lecture. You know, planning the lecture well ahead of time of delivery is time well spent, because a lecture thrown together at the last minute appears to be just that. So what you need to do now is to take time to plan the objectives of the lecture, to gauge how much time it will take to cover the content, and to consider the difficulty of the material and the ability level of the audience. So once you are already clear of the objectives and the level of depth to which you will go with the content, it is time now to start a written outline. And it can take into several forms. So the first one is the hierarchical or classical format. Okay, and this is the most commonly used form, okay, especially in our case as physical therapists. So in this approach, information is grouped, as you can see in here, okay, and then divided and subdivided, okay, in typical outline form. So just like this one. So we have the primary heading, and then there is a sub, okay, heading, okay, that's the secondary heading, and so on, okay. So we also have another format, and we call this the problem-centered format. So the problem-centered format is also popular. So in this structure, a problem is posed, and various hypotheses and solutions are developed. So the structure might look something like this example, okay? And this is now teaching the basic concepts of fever and its causes and treatment. So usually when problems are complex, the hypotheses and solutions may be overlapping, so making the outline appear more complicated. So this kind of lecture now requires a lot of clarification and examples, so which will be explained to you. Okay? Okay, so the lecture may also follow a comparative structure. Okay, this is used when the objective is to differentiate between two entities. Okay, and this could be through a chart type format to help students visualize the comparisons. So just like in this case, we have here the central nervous system versus the peripheral nervous system. So it's important now to come up with a table so that you could now differentiate, okay, the two. And the fourth common structure now is the thesis format. So this involves the lecturer taking a position on an issue or a particular viewpoint on a subject, and then supporting or justifying that viewpoint or position with evidence or logic. So an example of this approach might be a lecture on topics of, let us say, ethical conflicts. Okay, and there should be a particular uh, research or a journal, okay, that could support the the position of the lecturer. Okay, so whatever approach is appropriate for your topic and the audience, it is now important that you make the structure of the lecture clear to the learners. Okay, next. So what about the characteristics, ma'am, of a disorganized lecture? Okay, so we've been talking about organization of a lecture, but do we have, okay, the characteristics of a disorganized lecture? Yes, okay, because in delivering the lecture, the planning and organizing of content are not finished. Okay, so or rather, even if you were already done with planning and organizing of content, now it's time to deliver the lecture, and you need to plan your delivery, rehearse, and consciously think about your techniques of delivery if you are to maximize your effectiveness. And there could be some, okay, of some lectures that are disorganized. So these include now a structure or outline is not obvious to the listener and no apparent rationale for sequence of topics. Another thing is there is no mention of the objectives or desired learning outcomes of the lecture. Diba? Sabi natin, objectives are very, very important because this would be our basis, okay, for our entire session. So lecturer also mentions the same topic at different times for no apparent purpose other than failing to complete a thought at one time. Kumbaga, yung mga lecturers dito, kumbaga, random, no? Basta na lang silang nagsasabi ng topic na wala naman siyang connection. Yun ang sinasabi dito. So, there are also no advanced organizers. Okay, when we talk of advanced organizers, we are actually pertaining to a statement that forms a bridge, okay, between concepts already discussed and those to come. So, para bang, kunwari, na kapag discuss ka ng isang topic like vital signs. So, ang diniscuss mo, for example, una is temperature. Tapos, basta-basta na lang bigla kang magsasabi na pulse na. So, it's important to connect the last topic, no, with the new topic. Ganun po yon. So, we call them the advanced organizers. So, there is also no transition between sections of the lecture. And transitions must be there, okay? Para malaman ng estudyante na, tapos na kami dun sa isang topic. And at the end, there is no summary or tying thoughts together. So, napaka-importante po na kahit papano ay tayo ay nagbibigay daw po ng summarization at the end. Okay? So, ma'am, in delivering a lecture, ano naman po yung dapat po naming malaman? Okay? So, number 1 is, you must control your anxiety. Okay? Importante po yan. Dapat, hindi ka anxious, no? Okay? During your lecture. You have to control that. And one effective control mechanism is imaging. So, you try to visualize yourself, okay, as what or how you wanted to appear to your audience. Ganun po ang imaging. Another one is spontaneity. In here, you have to avoid, no, yung reading in class, ganon. So, minsan kasi parang kapag ka nagle-lecture ka, di ba? Tapos, nagbabasa ka sa harap ng mga estudyante mo. So, ano sa tingin mo yung tingin nila sa'yo ngayon? Okay? So, the best thing that you have to do to avoid the temptation to read is do not write your lecture out in full sentences. Ayan. So, you can use like lists and phrases lang. Okay? And then, you have to think during the delivery and the spontaneity now will increase. Okay? So, another technique is, or what we call now, way, okay, is your voice quality. Okay? So, it's a factor, rather. So, if your voice is not loud enough for everyone in the class to hear easily, okay, it's important for you to use a microphone. Okay? Somehow, okay, you can project your voice with a few pointers from a speech teacher and some practice. Never ever lecture with a monotone voice. No? Okay? So, it would just be making your students be bored, okay, and put them to sleep, okay. So, it's important for you to at least, okay, lighten up and how would I say it? Yun bang yung boses mo is something that is engaging. Ganon. Okay? Next is your body language. One factor, okay, to consider is how you move. Napaka-importante po nito, no? Do not stand glued to one spot in especially at the back of a podium, kung may podium po yun, no? So, you have to move to the side occasionally or stand in front of the podium, okay? Or even sit on the desk for a while. That should not be done, okay? So, you can also use your hands for emphasis, okay? But don't move too much, no? To the point that it would distract your students, okay? So, be aware of your body language. You have to keep your arms, okay, it should not be folded, okay, or wringing your hands, okay, or playing with a piece of chalk or a paper clip, because this can all indicate that you are nervous, okay? So, next is the speed of delivery. Okay, the pacing of a lecture affects both the learner's comprehension and enjoyment of the material. So, if you are too slow, it can induce boredom. But if it's too fast, it can result now in writer's cramp for students as they struggle to take notes, no? And to understand what is being said. So, a pause now and again would help the students to catch up and give them both, or give both of them and you a few seconds to reflect on what has been said. Okay? So another factor is getting off on the right foot. It's important that the way you begin a lecture sets the tone for all that follows. Para bang sinasabi natin na first impressions last. Okay? So try to avoid just walking into the class and immediately launching into the lecture. So, a little casual conversation for a minute or two in the beginning of your class helps you to relax and to establish some rapport with your audience. Okay? And it's important also to get the attention, no? Or you have to open with an attention getter. Next one is clarifying during the lecture. So, clarifying confusing or difficult concepts during a lecture is important or essential. So, too often, students complain that when they ask a teacher to clarify a difficult concept, all they get is repetition of what has already been said. So, you have to know, okay, how to do clarification. So, to be done effectively, no, you can use examples and analogies, no, rather than repeating it. Yan. So, kailangan daw kino-connect daw po natin siya, okay, sa isang concept, okay, in some examples. Next is facilitating retrieval from memory. So there are several techniques that you can use during the delivery of a lecture that will help listeners to later remember the information. So one method is repetition. You have to remember, repetition enhances learning. So although, as was just mentioned, repetition does not help to clarify muddy points, it does help to fix information in memory and make it more likely to be retrieved at a later time. Somehow you could also elaborate, okay, because elaboration is another form of repetition. And imagery is also another mechanism by which information can be lodged in memory for later retrieval. So these are some techniques, or actually factors to consider when you would be doing your lectures already to avoid a disorganized lecture. So now let's have the different types of lecture. Yan. So we have here about 5 types of lecture. And the first one is what we call the traditional oral essay. So pag sinabi nating traditional oral essay, the teacher here is an orator, is the only speaker. So para bang ang dating is passive yung mga learners dito, no? Para ka lang daw, parang yung isang pare sa simbahan na nagsesermon, ganun lang. So, wala pong magiging interaction coming from the audience. So, somehow, may advantage po ba yung traditional oral essay? Somehow, meron naman po, no? Because there is this fear of not being able to cover all of the material. So, that is why yung mga teachers ninyo, ginagawa nila ng paraan na, ay, ako na lang ang magsasalita para hindi natatagal. So, ganon. Next is the participatory lecture. This begins with learners brainstorming ideas on the lecture topic based on what they have read in preparation. So, it's important na prior to the lecture, your students already know something. Okay? Para kapag ka nag-post ka ng isang question, okay, meron nang masasagot yung mga estudyante mo kasi alam na nila yun in advance, and then doon magsisimula yung lecture ninyo, and we call this the participatory lecture. Next is the lecture with uncompleted handouts. So dito naman, it involves a somewhat traditional oral essay format, but, okay, the learners here would be supplied with handouts, okay, containing the lecture outline in some detail, but with blank spaces for learners to fill in information. So, bakit daw po natin ginagawa yon? This would now allow the learners to focus their attention on some important points, and they would just be including that in their handout. So another one is the feedback lecture. So this actually consists of mini lectures interspersed with 10 minute small group discussions structured around questions related to the lecture content. Okay, sorry, medyo maingay po dito sa amin. I hope you're going to bear with me. Okay? So this approach gives the learners now the opportunity to manipulate the lecture content and apply it immediately, thus enhancing learning and memory recall. So para bang ang nangyayari dito is nagle-lecture ka and then eventually magkakaroon ng mga group discussions, no? Pwede mo silang gawing grupo-grupo and then saka ka na naman continue with your lecture. And the last one is the mediated lecture. So this is a term describing now the use of media such as films, slides, or web-based images along with the traditional lecture. So this approach can be used for web-based courses as well as classroom courses. Using images of some type can add an emotional component to the lecture and now assist in changing attitudes. So, we would be talking about the next traditional type of teaching methodology, and that would be discussion.